Hello and welcome back to Rock Records Reviewed. My name's Adam, and this week we're going to take a look at a topic very close to my heart and soul, and that's the top 10 rock guitar solos of all time. The guitar, the electric guitar, is of course the preeminent instrument in rock music, and there was a time, I think, when virtuosity and musicianship and guitar solos, any kind of solo, were held in high esteem, especially back in the 60s and 70s. We seem to have lost a little bit of that over the last couple of decades for one reason or another. But I grew up around guitars. My mother was a player, so there was always guitars lying around the house. And I've been playing pretty much all my life, and now I'm a professional guitar player. It's what I do for a living. And if I may be a little immodest for a moment, I'm a fairly tasty player. And although technically I know absolutely what I'm talking about here, at the end of the day, this list isn't really about any of that at all. It's about, it's about what gets the adrenaline flowing. It's about what makes the heart soar, what wakens the soul, and what makes you basically just get the air guitar out of the closet and have a good old strum, because we all still do it, even us professionals. But what makes a great solo? Well, for me, for starters, I think it always needs context. If you just want to sort of whittle off 1,000 notes a minute without stopping once to consider the music you're playing along to, then you may as well just sort of lock yourself in your bedroom and play on your own, as you'll be pleasing nobody but yourself. A great solo often has a dramatic arc to it. It's usually highly empathetic to the music behind it, and it often takes the song, an already great song, to an even higher musical and even magical plane than it was before. Great solos don't have to be fast, they don't have to be technical, dazzling, or impossible to play. In fact, often those kind of solos are the dullest ones to listen to, I think. They say it's just as important as what you don't play as what you do, but the real power of a solo is in the space between the notes. And for some players, there's an absolute truth in that, I think. Just listen to B.B. King for a perfect example. But we may discuss a bit more of that as we go down the list. At the end of the day, there are actually no rules about what you play, just as long as you play with feeling, you play with passion, and play with purpose, and you'll inevitably win people over with what you do. As usual, this isn't really the 10 greatest guitar solos of all time. That would be an absolutely insane undertaking. But these are simply my 10 favourite solos, or 10 of my favourite solos from the many thousands I've heard, played, learned, screwed up over the years. The one criteria I've kept in here is that it can't be from an instrumental piece of music, thus ruling out a lot of maybe Jeff Beck pieces. It has to be a solo taken from a vocal song. And I hope to justify my choices. And I'm dying to hear your selections at the end. But let's strap on, plug in, tune up, and throw some shapes, and start our rundown. That sort of all sounded vaguely innuendo-y, didn't it? Didn't mean it to. Right, look, let's start with my guitar solo at number 10. And a lot of these solos you might anticipate being in here, perhaps not this one. And it's James Honeyman Scott's beautiful solo from Kid, which was on the Pretenders' magnificent debut album in 1980. This is a great example of the solo taking the song to another place. The song itself is a wonderful song, but it is a simple chord sequence, C, A minor, F, G, the kind of chord sequence you hear all over pop music all the time. But then the solo comes in, modulates, changes key of the song up to E. And for most players, that would be licensed to go off on some widdly soaring solo. We've changed key, we've done the truck driver's gear change, so I'm going to go for it. But James Honeyman Scott, he's so restrained and classy here. He opens with a lovely hammer-on pull-off lick, and then does a run of very, very sweet arpeggios with suspended notes before some perfectly weighted licks that resolve the whole song, the whole solo beautifully. It's just so tasteful and it's so musical. And I think it's something of a tragedy that James Honeyman Scott didn't live longer and give us more moments like this, because I think he was a wonderful player and a great foil to Chrissie Hynde as well, and one of those special players who always puts the song first. And here we go, a great example of a solo not having to be flashy and over the top. It's just absolutely perfect for this lovely song. At number 9, I'm going to put Richie Blackmore's mind-boggling solo from Highway Star, which was the opening track from Deep Purple's classic 1972 album Machine Head. Richie Blackmore is one of the most brilliant and dynamic players who ever wielded a Strat, and Highway Star is one of Deep Purple's most explosive songs. So as a guitar player, you need to rise to that moment. You can't let the side or the song down. Such are the great responsibilities we guitar players have to bear. But the other element here is that John Lord has already smashed it with a fabulous Hammond solo. So there's an element of competition here. There's an element of gunslinging, as some people call it. Richie's solo, it starts with some blues licks, but the magic here is in the fact that he's tracked it with an absolutely airtight harmony, which means he's played another guitar over the top, tracking with an airtight harmony. And then on the second pass, he brings in a repetitive hook which subtly changes the music and acts as something to draw you in. When you put repetition into a solo, you get drawn in, because then it's not just a blizzard of notes over the top. And then he brings the harmony into that hook, and then he builds the tension, which he tightens even further with these speedy triplets that ascend, and then they just descend down again, like sort of the embers from a firework or something. And then he resolves with some more blues licks before Ian Gillan comes back in. As a whole, it's clever, it's imaginative, it's dynamic, and it's very Richie Blackmore. And in many, many ways, it's the absolute highlight of the song. And number 8, something that is the absolute opposite end of guitar playing, and it is Neil Young playing Cortez the Killer from his wonderful 1975 album Zuma. This is Neil in full Neil mode, playing absolutely whatever his instincts are pushing him to sort of try. This song starts with kind of this ragged guitar intro that has that unique Neil Young tone. I think he's playing Old Black, his classic Les Paul. And there's wrong notes, and the timing is loose, and it's kind of ambly and shambly. But through it all, you get these tiny little hooks and these moments of absolute beauty. And you know that Neil is playing with no filter at all. It's absolutely coming from his soul. And so many of his solos are like this. And for the intro, he keeps it all very low, down at the low end of the guitar. And then for the main solo, he moves up into the mid-range. But at no point does he ever take it too far and too high, because that just wouldn't work with the pace and the mood of the music behind him. Other guitar players with less restraint would go right up to the top, and then they'd just kind of dominate everything, and it would take over, and it would just ruin the vibe. But here it's almost hypnotic. It's like some higher power almost is guiding his fingers across the fretboard. I'm absolutely certain Neil Young's never played this solo the same way twice. I don't think he'd know how. But it's a great example of how magical this loose improvisational playing can be. You know, and again, you just don't need to be a flashy virtuoso to make something special. And number 7, I'm going to put one of the most influential solos of all time, and that is Eddie Van Halen's solo from Michael Jackson's Beat It from his Thriller album from 1983. I was just a young kid when Thriller came out, and I'd grown up on bluesy based solos of Clapton and the melodic genius of George Harrison, players like that. And I suspect my jaw dropped when I first heard Eddie's solo, as did the jaws of millions of young guitar fans across the world who hadn't heard this kind of playing before. Eddie was the preeminent exponent of tapping. Tapping is where, instead of playing a load of notes, plucking here and bending or playing fretting here, you actually tap the fret, so you can play many more notes much faster. And now look, tapping comes in for a lot of stick. That's, a lot of people think that it's soulless and it's nothing more than a party trick, but trust me, it's nevertheless very hard to do well. And it sounds explosive when it's done with great musicality and wit, like the best tappers like Eddie Van Halen and Steve Vai have. I suspect millions of kids began tapping and getting into Eddie Van Halen after hearing this, and I was no exception. And whilst I've kind of moved on from that style, I still love the band, and I still love this solo. It still gives me goosebumps, because you have all that space before the solo starts, and you have that heavy breathing. You know, Michael Jackson and Quincy Jones have known to leave that space because something special's coming, and then you hear Eddie whirring into life with his guitar, and he just absolutely smashes it out of the park. And number 6, something a little bit more stately and magisterial, and it's David Gilmour's wonderful solo, 2 solos in fact, from Comfortably Numb on Pink Floyd's 1980 album The Wall. This song is a guitar player's dream to play along to, because it's slow and there's plenty of space, and it has that classic descending chord sequence that you hear all over old rock songs. Usually they're in A minor. This is in B minor, so it's upper tone, which in this case I think is actually a more fun position to play in. And this, like I said, this is actually 2 solos. Now the first isn't in that descending sequence, it's in D major, and David Gilmour comes in with a very, very high F sharp, which is really beautiful. It's a wonderful note to come in on, and he does that a lot, David Gilmour. He did the same thing on the solo on the Final Cut. But the famous, and that first solo is wonderfully melodic, and it's very, very graceful. But then the second solo is the legendary one, where the descent comes in, and he just wrenches up the drama with a series of perfectly played blues licks. But as much as anything here, it's the touch and the tone that make this solo so legendary. It's not particularly difficult to play, but it's almost impossible to play like David Gilmour plays it. And as the drama rises, he does go higher up the neck, because the song and the tension is demanding it. It's an epic song, and it needs an epic guitar statement, and Dave Gilmour delivered in absolute spades. At number 5, I'm going to put Jimi Hendrix and his solo, his bonkers solo from All Along the Watchtower, from his last studio album Electric Ladyland in 1968. The song, of course, was written by Bob Dylan, but Jimi Hendrix, I think it's fair to say, has totally made it his own. I think you could argue that this is possibly the single greatest cover version in rock and pop history. I've just gone and blown another list. You know the answer already if I ever do that one. But you know, the thing about Jimi Hendrix is he had an incredible unique feel. His timing was so strange. It's almost as if the notes are kind of just flying about above his head, and he's just plucking them down. And that makes him one of the hardest guitar players to tab out, as there's just so much nuance in his timing and his feel. And in this solo, Hendrix pulls out all these fabulous tricks from his big book of guitar playing. There's punchy blues licks, there's this woozy tracked slide guitar, there's this blistering wah-wah runs. And then he moves into this lovely strummed chordal section, where he kind of inverts the music around him, finishing with this sort of classic ascending double stop held bends, a trick that you recognise instantly as Jimi Hendrix, and a trick that I rip off nightly when I'm playing. The whole solo, it's imaginative and it's musical, it's clever, but it's also completely unique. It's a very, very hard solo to emulate accurately. So we get to the top 4, and at number 4, I'm going to put Eric Clapton's blistering live solo from Cream's version of Robert Johnson's Crossroads. This was on their Wheels of Fire album, recorded over 2 nights at the Fillmore. Now, I love a lot of Eric's Cream solos. I think they're sort of really beautifully crafted nuggets of psychedelic guitar playing. But I have no idea what Eric was on when he recorded this. This is just an explosion of licks and runs he plays here that is bewildering. It's all very blues based, but it's like he's opened a dam in his head, and he can't get the ideas out fast enough. This would be a hard solo to imagine, let alone play. And I think it's almost jazz-like in its kind of imperious improvisational quality. Eric never really played like this again. He didn't really want to. He wanted to step back and be a member of a band rather than a sort of virtuoso out front. So I'm so glad this got recorded. It's a real landmark in rock guitar, which Eric had a few of those along the way. He drives the song along with this very groovy lick that he's written in A. It's not on the original recording. And then there's two solos here. And in the first, he sort of stretches and squashes the music with his licks. Sort of to quote Spinal Tap, suddenly time has become so elastic. And the timing feels weird because the licks are so imaginative and strange. I mean, it makes me laugh, this solo. It's so good, trust me. And the second solo here, he builds on the momentum and it becomes more and more frenzied. And, he's got that rich tone that he called woman tone. The vibrato is beautiful. And he uses, on the second solo particularly, he uses that brief repetition that we talked about earlier to anchor the solo back a bit, to give you those little hooks to keep you interested, so it doesn't just get away from him too much. Look, Eric Clapton's come in for a lot of stick for various reasons, but don't ever let anybody tell you that he wasn't a brilliant guitar player. They're just talking vindictive, ignorant nonsense, because he really, really was. Just go and listen to this, and you'll see what I'm talking about. And number 3 on my list, I'm going to put Elliot Randall's joyous solo from Reelin' in the Years from Steely Dan's 1972 debut album, Can't Buy a Thrill. So the first thing you got to know here is that Elliot's playing with this really scratchy tone on his guitar, which makes it cut through the music beautifully. The music behind him, as you'd expect from Steely Dan, is immaculate and very precise. So you have this scratchy guitar tone that sounds like it should be a little bit ragged and loose, but actually it's incredibly musical and it just glides over the music effortlessly. The solo starts with a repetitive run, which he uses as a hook, and then he brings in a harmony to track it. We've seen a few of those already on this list. I do that myself with a lot of my music. I'm starting to realise where I get it all from. Before at 2:30, he goes off at 2 minutes 30. He goes off on a soaring solo that pays no attention to blues scales or conventions, whatever. This is jazz rock, and he does jazz rock pop even. I mean, there's a lot of stuff here which is kind of outside of jazz, although jazz does incorporate an awful lot, has to be said. And he does this twice, and then he comes back and with the same opening lick on the second solo, and he's weaving these licks around the music in such an interesting way. And he's playing licks as he's ascending up the neck, and he's playing licks as he's coming back down the neck, in and out of the music. There's a fabulous little trill rundown before the song fades out towards the end as well. I think this is a real untethered joy of a solo. It's so uplifting, and it's fun, and it's cheeky, and it makes what is already a phenomenally great song even better. And that's a job well done. So the top 2 here, my number 2 is one you might expect to have seen on this list, and that is Don Felder and Joe Walsh's twin guitar magnum opus that closes Hotel California from the 1976 Eagles album of the same name. Now, I know many of you will think this is a very predictable choice, but look, take it from me. This is a work of guitar playing genius. It's so famous as a guitar solo for a reason. It's become famous because it's bloody great. The song is, of course, a rock classic, which has become fated as much for this epic solo it has for the rest of it. Now, the solo kicks in over the verse chords where you'd expect the chorus to come in, the third chorus to come in, and Don Felder opens with a 3-fret bend, which always grabs the attention. And then for 2 wonderful minutes, he and Joe Walsh trade passes with each other until they join up together in a harmonic run before they go off onto that cascade of harmonized triplets at the end, which closes the song, which is kind of iconic harmonized triplets. which is not a phrase I thought I'd say today. But as you'd expect from the Eagles, this is all about craft and construction. It's so well put together, this solo. And even though many prefer their solos to be wild and crazy, I think there's also an absolute merit in the opposite approach as well. Few, if any, guitar solos are as anticipated in a song as much as this one is, especially live. I've seen it many times live. And like I say, it's become iconic. And, when they're playing together, they're not gunslinging like we were talking before. They're working together to make the song work, to lift it onto another level. And young kids learning guitar, they still want to play this song, and they want to learn how to play this solo. And in many respects, I think you could argue that this is the most famous guitar solo of them all for that reason. It was one that was almost impossible to leave off this list. So that takes me to my number one guitar solo of all time. It's one that's very, very close to my heart. And it's by George Harrison. And it's his breathtakingly beautiful solo on Something by the Beatles from the 1969 album Abbey Road. George Harrison's gifts as a songwriter and a guitar player, there was an ability to tap into melodies that were unpredictable. I think they were elegant, and yes, they were spiritual. I think when you hear him at his best, there's another layer to his music that is unique and undefinable, and I think it comes from that part of him that is occupied by his inner light, if that makes any sense. And the solo on Something is a perfect example of that. It's not flashy, it's fairly short, it's not hard to play, but it's so graceful. It feels like it's just gently moving on the breeze, on the wind, like it's always been there. And with the notes, they'd kind of just brush past your ears. It's not demanding that you listen to it, but it's almost as if you choose to tune into it. You'll hear something that will take you to another level. The song, of course, is sublime. It's one of the greatest that's ever been written, in my opinion. And that George could match the song with a solo that makes it even better is nothing short of remarkable. 99% of players would have poured some predictable bluesy licks all over this, but George, with his innate sense of beauty and melody, managed to crown his greatest song with his greatest solo, seasoning it with subtle slides, modest hooks that are just perfect for the backing. The song, perfect for the backing, and it taking the song and the solo, both of them, each other working together to take each other to another level. You could say it's almost transcendental. And really, I think the best guitar playing is, I think whether you're listening or playing, and I don't just mean guitar playing here. This is, any instrument played beautifully, played well. I think, we're all looking for that moment when you can close your eyes and you're whisked away to almost like another dimension. And I know it sounds corny, and I know many non-musicians and non-music lovers are going to call bullshit. But trust me, there are moments when you genuinely feel like you're on another plane, and no recreational drugs involved. Honest gov. But look, that's my top 10 guitar solos. I could have made it a top 1,000. I really could have done, and but that would have been even less interesting than my list was in the first place, I think. But look, God, I feel awful. I've left off so many guitar players and guitarists that mean so much to me. The guitar really is my thing. Sultans of Swing, War Pigs, Paranoid Android, Johnny B. Good, Bohemian Rhapsody's a great solo, Moon Age Daydream, Mick Ronson, so many Jimmy Page solos, pretty much anything by Jeff Beck. But I hope you enjoyed my list anyway. I hope it didn't get too technical. I tried not to get too technical, but I am dying to know what is going to make your top 10 guitar solos of all time. So please tell me in the comments below, and I will see you again soon for another Rock Records Reviewed. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.